Hi everyone, I'm Alicia Krause, and we're live with our newest episode of The Conversation. Once again, I am your host, Alicia Krause, and our very own Ben Shapiro will be taking live questions for an entire hour. You are ecstatic about this.
Oh, goodness. Oh, goodness, am I ever.
Please remember that our conversation is live for everyone to watch, but you can only be a part of it if you are a subscriber. And by being a part of it, you can subscribe to dailywire.com right now and check out our pinned comments on this video for info on submitting questions. Be sure to tune in for next month's episode on Tuesday, July 17th at 5:30 p.m. Eastern, 2:30 p.m. Pacific, starring the great Andrew Clavin.
I wish that he were here right now, and I were not.
Well,
and that is not just me. Listen, I like doing the conversation.
You had a rough night.
It was really rough. Okay, so like at 11 p.m., I'm ready to go to bed. It's like 10:30 actually, and I'm great. I'm gonna go to bed early. It's gonna be awesome.
Yep.
And then I go in the bathroom, and the bathtub is filling up from the drain, and so we have to call the plumber at 10:30 at night to snake the entire main line. So that took till 1 in the morning.
Ooh.
And then my 4-year-old decided, you know, it'd be awesome. Let's get up and party at 3 a.m. And then my 2-year-old decided, you know, it'd be even more awesome. At 5:30 a.m., I'm up for the day.
And they're like, partying, yeah.
God, you're even more irritating when I'm this tired. I just can't. I can't.
So I did just tweet that Angry Ben, I think, is the most fun Ben.
I'm glad you appreciate it.
Going back to our morning radio days.
Oh, man. How many angry days were on that radio show? A lot of angry days.
But some of your angriest days were the best radio.
Okay, well, let's find out.
Let's find out if this ends up being the best episode of The Conversation ever. Kicking it off with Spencer. In your opinion, how much time and practice does it usually take for an aspiring writer with some natural talent to become an excellent writer?
Years. I mean, really,
Wow.
it takes a long time to become a very good writer, and you have to start young. It's all about how much you write, how much you read, and churning. And there is no substitute for writing and editing and writing and editing. And it's good to have some people around you who are capable of editing your work and making sure that you're getting better in what you're doing. But it's not just how much you write, obviously. It's also how much you read and what kind of writers you tend to read. Because especially when you're first starting out, it's hard to create a distinctive voice. I remember when I was first writing my syndicated column, my voice sounded a lot more like
12?
17. My articles sounded a lot more like Ann Coulter because that was sort of the voice that I was reading a lot at the time. And now my articles don't read like Ann Coulter, they read like me. And that's just a voice that comes out naturally over time, I think.
So a little behind the scenes here for our subscribers and everyone watching. I was talking to my girlfriend, Mary Catherine Ham, of course, of the Federalist and CNN fame. And she and I were griping to each other about how sometimes we get a really great idea for a piece. We feel like we knock it out, but then by the time it gets edited and all this stuff, we're like, is that out of the news? Whereas you and our girlfriend, Bethany Mendel, literally can churn out pieces like from your iPhone.
Yeah.
I have a thought for a piece and Ben's already written it.
Well,
how do you do that?
My mind, my brains. Also, I type 138 words per minute or something, but yeah.
And you self-edit.
I do self-edit, and I have the ability to post my own stuff, so I don't have to deal with my editor. My editor is me, so that's good.
It's incredible, but it's a good skill to have. How does somebody hone that skill?
Again, you write quickly and also learn to write under deadline. See how fast you can churn stuff out. Instead of trying to be a perfectionist about everything, first try and see how much you can write how quickly, and then go back and edit.
Okay. Samuel says, Ben, do you believe in a particular vocation? Meaning, do you think there is a particular calling by God for each person pertaining to whether they should marry, what they should do for work, etc.?
Yes. I mean, I think that your skill set generates, and your personality generates certain choices in life, and I think that all of us are tailored for particular choices, and how we act in accordance with those choices is going to make us happier or less happy. So if you have a skill set that is tailored for one profession, and you have an aptitude for that profession, a liking for that profession, but you like another one a lot more, and you suck at it, then you're probably doomed to be unhappy, because the fact is that you should be finding the place where you can do something you like, something that you're good at, and something you feel makes the difference. If you can find the sweet spot that has all three of those characteristics, then you're likely to have a happier life.
Do you think that you have a job that has all three of those characteristics?
Well, yeah, I mean, I love what I do.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm pretty good at talking, it turns out, and I'm a pretty good writer.
I love the inflection when you talked about, I love what I do.
I'm so tired right now, Alicia. I will strangle you to death.
If you want to figure,
I'm so tired.
And if people want to figure out what they're good at,
I won't actually strangle Alicia.
Please
also,
don't.
Okay, by the way,
and if people want to figure out what they're good at,
if you want to figure out what you're good at,
skills.
hone some skills, then perhaps you should take a look at Skillshare, which is an online learning platform with over 20,000 classes in business, design, technology, and more. You can take classes in social media marketing, illustration, data science, mobile photography, creative writing, you name it, and they have it. We've taken classes here at the office in everything from social media marketing to watercolors. Whether you are trying to deepen your professional skill set or start that side hustle or just explore a new passion, Skillshare is there to keep you learning and thriving. As I said, I've taken a couple of their courses. They're really great, and they're taught by experts. They're all about 45 minutes long by people who really know what they're talking about. Join the millions of students already learning on Skillshare today with a special offer just for my listeners. Get 2 months of Skillshare for just 99 cents. Right now, Skillshare is offering my listeners, Ben Shapiro Show listeners, 2 months of unlimited access to over 20,000 classes for just 99 cents. To sign up, go to Skillshare.com/Shapiro. Again, go to Skillshare.com/Shapiro to start that 2 months now. Again, Skillshare.com/Shapiro to go check it out.
All right, let's keep it rolling because we love to get as many subscriber questions in as possible. Next person is Christian. What are the problems with the French Revolution?
Oh, there are so many problems with the French Revolution.
Didn't you and Jonah Goldberg talk about this on a Sunday special?
Yes, there are many problems with the French Revolution. So, number one, lots of beheadings. So that turned out to suck. But also, the French Revolution,
destruction of religious artifacts and history.
Lots of terrible things, as it turns out, and leading to the Napoleonic Wars. So it was just great all the way around. But if you're going to talk about the real problems with the French Revolution, you sort of have to juxtapose it to the American Revolution.
Okay.
So the American Revolution was more conservative in orientation because the American Revolution was based on the idea that we ought to preserve certain Anglo-Saxon traditions of law and Judeo-Christian traditions of morality in the context of a libertarian government that was smaller and allowed for personal freedom. The French Revolution essentially said that, while the American Revolution said that the individual trumps the needs of the communal, the French Revolution said the opposite. So the French Declaration of the Rights of Man specifically says that if your rights run up against the rights of the state, then the rights of the state win. And there is also a real attempt to throw religion out the window.
Yep.
And so there, for example, during the French Revolution, there actually was something called the Cult of Reason. They went into the Notre Dame Cathedral and they took down all of the crosses, they took down all of the icons, and instead they put up statues of the Goddess of Reason. They actually held bacchanals to the Goddess of Reason at Notre Dame Cathedral. The Cult of Reason was one. There's also the Cult of the Supreme Deity, which was Robespierre's sort of deist version of the Cult of Reason. And all of this resulted in this manifest belief that human beings were fully capable of forming their own moral system on the communal level, and that true happiness was to be found in shaping the world through communal power. And this leads off, it's not just what the French Revolution itself was, it leads off some of the worst ideas in human history, the French Revolution. It leads off the idea of romantic nationalism, that nationalism disconnected from any sort of ideas of liberalism or freedom is in and of itself a good, because one of the things the French Revolution did was unique, is that they were fighting a series of wars at the time with Prussia and later with the British. And they, for the first time in human history, until then, war was not something that the citizenry took part in. Until then, you basically had the feudal lords and the knights, and these people would go out and they would fight, and then that was literally their job, right? They would protect the fiefdom, and all of the citizens would live as serfs, and that's how you would do things. You'd have a professional military class, and then you'd have everybody else. The French Revolution undid that. They said, now you are a citizen, that means you're a soldier. So everyone is now a soldier. So you have a complete integration of the civilian population with the military population, and that is an overwhelmingly powerful move in terms of military history. It also leads to the idea that great power can be found in nationalistic unity, and that leads to the unification of Germany. Germany responds with this romantic fervor of nationalism and the movement from Prussia and Bavaria being separate states, for example, into a united Germany by 1870 under Bismarck. So I mean, that's one thing. The movement toward rationality unbounded from moral considerations, that was the movement away from Judeo-Christian moral systems that leads to the rise of alternative moral systems ranging from communism to Nazism. There are all sorts of problems with the French Revolution, really a devastating period in world history, and good ideas gone wrong. The difference, as Jonah says, between Locke and Rousseau, Locke, again, believing in the idea of individual liberty as springing from a state of nature, and Rousseau believing that human beings are naturally good, and that if we could just give all of our power to the state through the general will, then the state would end up doing all sorts of wonderful things for us.
That's turned out to be a dangerous theory.
Yeah, I mean, literally hundreds of millions of dead people, yeah.
Yep. Brandon says, hi, Ben and Alicia. Oh, thanks for saying hi, Brandon. Children have been separated from their parents for years now, but what is the solution to keep families together? I assume he's talking about the situation at the border.
I'm not sure, actually.
Really?
So I think that could be, we'll answer both questions. So
okay.
If we're talking about the situation at the border, then the simple solution is for there to be a piece of legislation passed that overrules the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals decision in a case that was decided in 2016 about the Flores settlement, in which they basically said that you have to discharge all children regardless of the situation. Even accompanied minors have to be sent into the system. And that can be overturned by a simple act of Congress. The fact that Congress has not done that, I think, is stupid already. As far as the solution to keeping families together generally, like the anti-divorce, anti-family breakdown, number one, you actually have to have some skin in the game. So that means marriage. It doesn't mean you get together and you live with each other. It means you actually have to have skin in the game. That means an actual pre-commitment to stay together, no matter the situation, barring some sort of horrific infidelity or physical violence or something. And beyond that, I think that the solution to keeping families together is to think of yourself as a family unit. Like for me, I think the most beautiful thing in my life is the fact that when I go home and I look at my wife and I look at my children, this is the kingdom that I have built along with my wife. And this is a unit that is inseparable. And if something were to happen to one member of the unit would be irrevocably broken. To see yourself as an individual in the context of a family is a mistake. I think Jonah actually makes a very good point. Jonah Goldberg makes a good point. He says that we're all communists when it comes to our own family, but we should be capitalists when it comes to the general society at large. When it comes to your family, it is a matter of from each according to his ability to each according to his need, because my wife and I have a joint bank account. When it comes to taking care of the kids, you take care of the kids. Catch as catch can. That's just the way that it works. Exactly. And if you think of it that way, you're more likely to have a happy family life and to stay together.
Okay, good question from Brandon there. Elise says, how do you prepare for the show every day? What goes on behind the scenes that makes the show so brilliant?
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you. I mean, what goes on every day, aside from massive and copious amounts of rage, is the constant engagement with the news. So I'm in the news all the time, not just on Twitter all the time, but I'm writing at least 4 pieces a day for our website. I write a piece a week for National Review. I write a piece a week for Newsweek. I write a piece every couple of weeks for the Jewish Journal. I write a syndicated column every week. So I write.
Do you ever get bored?
Not really, thank God. So I'm writing on average, somewhere between 20 and 25 pieces a week.
So you have plenty of content.
Yeah, exactly. So when you're engaged with the news all that much, that means that you are going to be on top of it, and you already sort of have the narrative going at any given time of the day as to what the narrative is going to be for the next morning. So actually show prep, the formal show prep doesn't take all that long. I sort of have a generalized outline of where I want to go with the show, and then I send clips over to our producers, and they pull them because they're awesome at what they do. That's the most praise our producers are ever going to get. And
y'all better pull that clip and play it again at Christmas time.
That's exactly right, because it ain't coming again. And when it comes time for the show, then I basically am able to just riff for 45 minutes.
Because you do not have
There's nothing
pre-written
script. There's nothing pre-written for the show.
That's something that I think a lot of people don't realize, whether it's podcasting or talk radio, which is a world that we both came from before. You don't have like notes and stuff for it.
Yeah, there are a few hosts who actually will have like scripted monologues, but more often than not, it's you're doing it off the top of your head.
Okay, so it's Ben and his brilliance, and then the amazing team.
Exactly.
Aren't they an amazing team?
They are just amazingly mediocre.
Joel says, Hannibal Shapiro, with your restricted taste in music. Oh, I like Joel already. What are your thoughts on alt genres like electronic, EDM, trap, Bollywood, etc.? Are synth pads heresy?
I don't know anything you just said. I don't know any of those things.
Have you ever listened to 80s music?
I have listened to 80s music.
I'm assuming like he means like the synthesizer noise.
Okay, so synthesizers suck. Okay, so
is the synthesizer and the synth pad the same?
I don't. Why are you asking me? I just said I don't know what the hell you're talking about. I'm too tired for this, Alicia. I don't know. Okay, so when it comes to electronic dance music, I mean, I've heard some of it that I think is like I think some Daft Punk, I believe, is EDM, correct? So some of their stuff is somewhat interesting, although deeply repetitive. But overall, not too into it. It seems musically unsophisticated to me, but that's because I'm preppy.
We won't be seeing you at Coachella next year?
No, I'm going to go no on that, probably.
Is there any, I'm going to ask a follow-up to that question. Is there any top 40 song that you like right now?
No. I'd have to look at the current top 40.
Okay.
In the past couple of years, there have been a couple of top 40 songs that I thought were at least catchy.
And which one?
There was that. What's the one that? There's one I played on the show.
You like the boom clap one?
Oh, that was a long time ago.
But was that more than 2 years?
That shows terrible taste. Wow, I can't believe it. Yeah.
Well, you said that you thought it was a catchy tune and that What's Your Face could actually sing.
It is a catchy tune.
Yeah.
And there's also the.
I know that you don't think Adele is.
Rebel Just for Kicks is not the name of the song.
But
that has a catchy bass line. So now when I look at top 40 songs, I don't actually look for a good song. I just look for a catchy bass line because that's basically all that music has become.
Oh, gosh. Phoebe says, does your wife ever watch any of your speeches or debates?
Yeah, she does enjoy watching my speeches and debates, actually. She actually, because she likes me, she likes watching the speeches better than the debates, because if you love somebody and you watch them in an adversarial situation, it's a lot more nervous. Yeah, exactly.
Especially as women, we get a little anxious.
But she likes listening to the show. So whenever I'm sort of making fun of her or nodding at her, she's listening.
And what does she do for a living? I forgot.
Well, I've heard she's a doctor.
Oh, okay.
I have heard that. And to be a doctor requires a certain set of skills. And that's why you should go out and cultivate your own set of skills with Skillshare. It's an online learning platform, over 20,000 classes in business, design, technology, and more. You can take classes in everything. I mean, everything. We're talking data science and creative writing and mobile photography, watercolors, you name it, and they have it. Whether you're trying to deepen that skill set or start a side hustle or explore a new passion, Skillshare is there to help keep you learning and thriving. Again, listen, right now, whatever job you have, you're not going to have it in 5 years. Let's just face this, okay? Just warning everybody here, you're not going to have that job, which means your resume better be constantly increasing and getting better, and that's what Skillshare does for you. Join the millions of students already learning on Skillshare today with a special offer just for my listeners. Get 2 months of Skillshare for just 99 cents. That's right, Skillshare is offering my listeners, again, 2 months of unlimited access to over 20,000 classes for just 99 cents. Once you start, you're not going to want to stop. The learning is just fantastic. To sign up, go to Skillshare.com/Shapiro. That's Skillshare.com/Shapiro to start your 2 months right now. That's Skillshare.com/Shapiro. Go check it out.
Man, I guess the whole crew and I better re-up our resumes in 5 years since apparently we won't have jobs.
Well, I mean,
Skillshare.com.
Indeed.
Allie says, if you could choose any person currently alive to win the 2020 presidential election, who would it be and why?
I mean, I've said for years Thomas Sowell would be my ideal president because Thomas Sowell is a brilliant thinker, an eminent writer. I think that the presidency, honestly, the more I look at the presidency just as an institution, I'm not sure the president actually does all that much. Then we give the president a lot of credit for stuff that happens in the country. But the president has to operate along two tracks. One is to pursue good policy. President Trump, I think, on policy, up until the last 3 weeks, I thought was at like an A-. Now I'd put him more at like a B or a B+ because of the last couple of weeks of policy I'm not supremely happy with. But overall, I think he's done a pretty good job on policy. But there's another side of the presidency, and that is the teaching side of the presidency. This is where Ronald Reagan really excelled. And having Thomas Sowell out there lecturing people on basic economics every day sounds amazing to me. Like using the power of the presidency to actually teach people about politics, to teach them about values, I think would be a wonderful thing.
See, I would choose your spirit animal.
Oh, Nikki Haley? Well, Nikki's great. UN ambassador.
Hashtag girl crush.
She's terrific.
Blake says, Ben, Trump is coming to speak in my town tomorrow, and the whole town is planning to protest. It's tense. Do you have any advice? Should I see him speak, bail out of town, or walk into the fire?
Well, I mean, it depends. Are you really that animated to go see the rally? If you're animated to go see the rally, go. I mean, don't be deterred because of that. It'll be a safe place. I mean, he's the president of the United States. They're not going to let him get shouted out of town or something.
Yeah.
I've been in that situation myself, and if they'll protect me, they'll protect the president of the United States. So I think it'll be okay. But the fact that people are still feeling it necessary to go out there and protest en masse, I understand. You're making headlines. I understand you think that you are virtue signaling and that this is going to get policy done. One of the things that's, I think, detrimental in the way that the illegal immigration policy is being done right now is that so many members of the media and the political class think that the louder they speak and the more they yell, the more they're going to get something from Republicans. It's the opposite. What they're actually doing is they're undercutting the support base for Republicans to do anything, and more importantly, they're undercutting the support base for Democrats to work with Republicans because it's a lot easier politically for Democrats to sit off on the side and yell about things than it is for them to actually pass something comprehensive with Republicans.
Haley has a really interesting question. She says, what are your thoughts on 13 Reasons Why, of course, the Netflix series that's based on a book, and its controversial impacts on society? I am personally supportive of its graphic content, but a lot of people are offended by it.
So I watched a lot of the show. I was not a fan of the show. There are a couple of reasons for this. So number one, there are good statistics that show that in the aftermath of the release of the show, there was this dramatic uptick in the number of Google searches for suicide and suicide methods. There's something called the Werther effect. The Werther effect is a well-documented suicide copycat effect. It goes all the way back to the 19th century in Germany. Werther is named after the book The Sorrows of Young Werther by Goethe. And that book has this romantic story about this young man who shoots himself. And supposedly there were a lot of people who shot themselves because it was such a popular novel. Well, you actually see in the aftermath of, for example, Marilyn Monroe's suicide, there's a copycat effect where I think an additional 303 people in the surveyed period committed suicide over the average, specifically because when people see celebrities commit suicide, this creates a suicide epidemic. And 13 Reasons Why, you saw some evidence for that. Also, I do not believe the typical explanation that people who are bullied necessarily commit suicide as someone who's viciously bullied. I never had suicidal thoughts. I think that suicide is a lot more complex than you're mean to someone, they go and they commit suicide. I just, the data on what causes suicide are extraordinarily mixed. That doesn't mean you should bully anyone. Obviously, I think bullying is immoral and evil. But the sort of basic idea of 13 Reasons Why is you have a perfectly normal girl or a girl who's at least mostly normal who ends up committing suicide specifically because a lot of people are mean to her. And I just don't think that the evidence is there for that. In fact, what studies tend to show is when you remove depression from the equation, that bullying has very little to do with suicide. The depression can pre-exist. In fact, people who perceive themselves as victims of bullying very often perceive themselves that way because they were victims of depression already. So if you're more depressed, you tend to see yourself as a victim of bullying as opposed to somebody who's just taking their lumps.
Interesting. Sarah says, hey, Ben, which book do you like better, 1984 or Brave New World, and why?
So 1984 is a better book, just as a book. George Orwell is a better writer than Aldous Huxley. With that said, I think Brave New World is a more accurate look at what the possible future can look like. Now, 1984 obviously was written with communist Russia in mind, with tyrannical fascism in mind. And Brave New World was written more with the kind of decline of Western civilization in mind. If you look at the sort of promise of Brave New World, which is that we'll all be drugging ourselves into bliss, and we won't have any responsibilities, and we'll just be able to
have children,
right? Well, children will all be produced in a lab. Like that's a lot closer to what society is aiming toward now, this sort of hedonistic pleasure than 1984. But that's only because we live in a post-Soviet Union era. So if you're living in North Korea right now, I'm sure 1984 was a lot more realistic to you.
Interesting. Steven says, while perusing my long-forgotten list of books I read for high school, I remembered Davita's Harp by
Chaim Potok.
Okay.
Yeah.
Have you read it? What are your thoughts?
That's actually one of the ones I have not read. So Chaim Potok has a couple of books that are just fantastic. His two best books are The Chosen and The Promise. The Chosen is just a fantastic book about sort of the conflict between Hasidim, the ultra-religious, more mystical sect of Orthodox Judaism, and Misnagdim, who are people who are supposed to be sort of the rationalists. If you want a window into sort of some of the conflicts in Orthodox Judaism, both The Chosen and The Promise are excellent books and well worth reading.
But you haven't
I have
read
not read Davita's Harp, so I can't really give an opinion on it.
Christian says, what key aspect do you think a society needs for it to become democratized?
Well, the first thing that you need is 2,000 years of Judeo-Christian development. And then after that, you can start talking about democracy. The reason that I say that's not, I'm being facetious, obviously. You had democracy in ancient Athens. But for a society to be democratized requires a certain regimen of belief in individual rights and also a belief in the capacity of reason to help us convince one another, of argumentation. What I would say is that reason in the absence of religion tends toward communal/state tyranny, and religion in the absence of reason tends toward religious tyranny. It tends toward theocracy. So you need a common set of values. That set of values is built on a certain set of key principles ranging from individual value, worth, and freedom to the concept that that any sort of tyranny from above is likely to lead to more conflict, which has been historically accurate, I would say, although obviously a lot of great philosophers make the case for an aristocratic rule from above. I think that's a failure because I think bottom line is that decentralized knowledge is a lot more effective than centralized knowledge.
Kind of an argument that's used, well, the United States shouldn't go and try to democratize other countries, and there's no way that you can make democracies out of places that haven't had that.
So you can make democracies out of places that haven't had it, but you do have to nuke them twice and then occupy them for several generations, right? I mean, that's what happened in Japan, obviously. In Germany, there was a nascent democracy, the Weimar democracy, before the Nazi Germany, and then we had to occupy them. We still have troops on the ground in Germany. So you can democratize a country, but it requires forcibly changing the culture of the country in a lot of deep and abiding ways. If you're going to implant that in foreign soil, like I think Iraq could have been a democracy, but it would have taken and is still a quasi-democracy, but it would have taken a long time of westernization and safety and security in order for democracy to take place. The first precondition to democracy is a rule of law. There actually does have to be rule of law where people feel like they're not going to have their stuff stolen. Because if they feel like they're going to have their stuff stolen, then you form up into tribal bands and you beat the crap out of each other.
All right. Nicholas says, hi, Ben and Alicia. Ben, with Congress asking for documents from the DOJ recently regarding the Russia probe, the DOJ will not provide them unredacted. Shouldn't these congressmen have access, I think, to all this classified information?
You bet. Yes, Congress should have access to the classified information. The DOJ should turn it over. There's a lot of talk by the DOJ about the risks of turning over this sort of classified information, but then some of the classified information came out and it wasn't risky at all. So I don't trust the DOJ anymore. What I don't understand is why President Trump doesn't just declassify all of this. So President Trump, with the stroke of a pen, can declassify all this information, make it public, make sure that it doesn't violate classification standards when it's handed over to Congress. He hasn't done that. I don't know whether that's because he hasn't paid proper attention to it or whether it's because there's some classified material that damages him. But it seems to me that at this point, we all ought to see the documents because
we've had so much leaking, though. Do you think that if there is legitimately classified information that a Democrat or Republican could leak it?
Well, I mean, yes, but I mean, that's the whole point of declassifying. So, for example, I think the Carter Page FISA warrant ought to be declassified, and we ought to see that right now because there's been so much talk about it. We'll either know within the first 5 minutes or not whether that thing was trumped up for purposes of getting President Trump, as opposed to, now this is a legitimately gotten FISA warrant. I'll put it this way. I'm a lot more suspicious of political motivations inside the FBI than I was this time last week, before that Department of Justice Inspector General report came out.
Yep. Hal says, with a declining global birth rate, even we had an article this week on Daily Wire about how diaper sales in the United States are down because Americans aren't making babies anymore, and an increased out-of-wedlock birth rate. How can we morally protect the global economy and our future as a Judeo-Christian nation?
It's a serious question. It really is a serious problem. I think that a society that does not produce children is a society that is not based around the future. It's a society that seems to be based on redistribution of resources in the present, which is why baby boomers did an enormous disservice to the rest of the United States by basically sucking up an enormous amount of resources from future generations and then not producing enough kids to even pay for it. So, I think that that's a huge mistake. That people ought to be having more kids. I think it makes you a better person to have more kids. Studies tend to show that you are either happiest if you have no kids or many kids. It's interesting.
What counts as many?
More than 3.
Okay.
3 or more. So if you have 1 or 2, that's typically not enough. I mean, when I say typically, I mean, listen, you can have 2 kids and be very happy. But the reality is that if you're putting all your hopes and dreams in 2 kids as opposed to putting it in a bevy of kids who can help take care of each other, then that tends to lead to greater unhappiness. Also, again, a society that's not built around what values you want to preserve for the future generation is not going to be a society that I think is either worthy of upholding necessarily, or a society that has the will to uphold itself.
Karen says, what's up with Matt Walsh? Is he ever going to do a conversation? Why don't you ever mention his podcast?
I'm happy to mention Matt Walsh's podcast. You should go check it out right now at iTunes or SoundCloud. Matt is hilarious, and he does his podcast from his car, from a webcam in his car, and it's really funny, and it's really worth listening to. I don't agree with Matt about everything, but I don't agree with anybody about everything, so you should go check it out. And we should do an episode of The Conversation. I mean, it means also I would have to do one less of them every so often. So we should certainly do that.
Maybe they could be bonus episodes, so you still get to see me every 3 months.
Yeah, let's not do that. Let's just insert it in place of one of my regulars. I think that would be better, probably.
You are watching our latest episode of The Conversation with our very own Ben Shapiro here at Daily Wire, and our conversation is live for everyone to watch on YouTube, Facebook, on our website. But you can only be a part of it if you are a subscriber. I even got a little bit more sleep than you last night. Subscribe to dailywire.com now and check out our pinned comments on this video for information on submitting questions. And be sure to tune in next time for July's episode on Tuesday, July 17th at 5:30 p.m. Eastern, 2:30 p.m. Pacific, featuring Andrew Clavin.
Not me. Yeah, exactly. Andrew Clavin.
So it'll be Andrew and then Michael and then you again.
Yeah.
Unless you can wrangle Matt Walsh in there, maybe.
Right, exactly. I want to get him in the rotation. This 3-man rotation is not enough.
Blake says, hi, Ben. Where do you fall on the theory of evolution?
So I believe in the theory of evolution. With that said, I don't believe that evolution is a smooth, graded process. So the way that you're taught it in school is that evolution takes place over time in a very smooth way. The fossil record doesn't tend to suggest that. So I believe that that species can evolve from one to another, although the evidence for that is a little weaker than intra-species evolution, meaning a species evolving itself, like birds evolving to become the same kind of bird, but with slight differentiation. But with all that said, I'm not anti-theory of evolution. It just looks like the fossil record has certain areas of genetic explosion. And so the kind of smooth natural selection theory that basically a certain number of changes should take place over a certain course of time, the fossil record doesn't bear that out. But the evidence to support evolution itself, the idea of changes to the fossil record occurring over time, that I believe in and that I think is true, and that I also don't really have a problem squaring with the Bible, which is specifically directed toward a set of people at a particular time who are being told about scientific matters of which they know nothing. So I've never had a huge issue with that.
All right, Craig says, Dear Ben, you have referred to a law in court ruling explaining the separation of children from parents crossing the border. Which law and Ninth Circuit ruling are you referring to? You mentioned it earlier.
Right, so there's something called the Flores settlement that was in 1997. It was a settlement that took place between the federal government and some illegal immigrants. And basically it said that unaccompanied minors, so minors who come across the border illegally, that those people cannot be held in custody for longer than a certain period of time. Instead, if they are not prosecuted, they have to be handed over to the care of HHS or to a foster family, because you don't want 5-year-olds sitting in prison.
And isn't there something on the books that say within 20 days?
Right. So then what happened? So as part of the settlement, if you apply for, they can't be held for longer than 20 days. Mm-hmm. Typically, what that means is that if you're applying for asylum, then you're going to be released into the general population, because asylum cases take longer than 20 days. Then in 2016, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals extended the Flores settlement to apply to accompanied minors. So now it wasn't just that if you came here without a parent, and you're 7 years old, you now have to get released to a foster family. Now it was, if you come with your parents, you still have to be released out of custody and remanded to HHS into one of these holding areas, or you have to be remanded to a foster care situation or remanded to an aunt or an uncle, for example. And that seems to me utterly foolish. If you're coming here with your parents, it seems to me you should be able to stay with your parents. Now, what's hilarious about all of this is that in 2014, 2015, that's what the Obama administration did. They cracked down on illegal immigration in a fairly serious way after that huge wave at the border. Yep. And they were holding women and children together in confinement, and they were sued for that. They were said, that is apparently, the Obama administration actually said, we're doing this as a deterrent. And exactly the same way, the Trump administration is now saying they're separating parents and kids as a deterrent. The Obama administration was saying we are holding women and children as a deterrent. Federal court struck that down. They said you can't do that. You have to release the kid. You still can arrest the parent, but you have to release the kid. So here's the way it works. If President Trump decides that he wants to prosecute somebody, his DOJ wants to prosecute somebody for illegal immigration, then the kid cannot be held in prison with the parents, or they can't be incarcerated in jail with the parents. They have to be released. So when people say Trump could end this with the stroke of a pen, the only thing Trump could end with the stroke of the pen is the arrests. Right? He has no discretion when it comes to, I'm going to hold these kids in imprisonment with their parents. He can't do that. Okay, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals has already ruled that. Right, it has to be legislation that changes that, and that's exactly what should happen.
Okay, yay! Pop culture question from Andy, who says, "I know that you are not a fan of the Captain America movies. I'm curious as to why. I think the movies reflect on the importance of patriotism, individualism, and self-accountability." I
mean, so the basic morality of Captain America, I have no general problem with. I just,
you don't like the movies?
Yeah, I think they're.
Is that because Chris Evans once tweeted you that he doesn't like you?
No, actually, he tweeted me after I'd seen the first Captain America movie. I just think that he happens to be a rather wooden actor. I'm not a huge Chris Evans fan. Okay. On the scale of Chris's, right now it goes like Chris Pratt,
always,
Chris Pine, and then maybe Chris Evans. I have to think if there's another Chris that fits. Hemsworth. Hemsworth outrates Evans. You're right. Hemsworth comes in third. Pine's a better actor, but Hemsworth is hilarious. I don't think much of Chris Evans as an actor, and that's not just because he says that he dislikes me. I don't dislike him. He seems like.
So you're a fan of Captain America and the morals maybe that the comic books espouse, but not the movies?
Well, so here's the problem with Captain America in the movies, okay? In the comic books, basically Captain America is John McCain, right? He's a thawed-out old man who's really grumpy about everything and super patriotic, stuck in it's a fish out of water thing, stuck in a postmodernist society that doesn't value America all that much. That's what he is in the comics, which is what makes him great. He's like a throwback. America's awesome. Why are you all bitching about America?
I mean, that was in
right,
the first
exactly.
movie.
All this stuff was good. And now they sort of made him into just a normal superhero teenager who doesn't have that kind of edge. Right? So instead of him being 80 years old, which he really is, basically, they make it so that he is just a 30-year-old. Right now, he has a live-in girlfriend, and he acts just like a 30-year-old would today, as opposed to if they were doing it properly, he would be a guy who's like, yeah, I got to get married before I have sex with a woman because it's 1940, right? And in his mind, it's still 1940.
Yep.
So it's
that's why he doesn't like bad language.
Right, exactly. One of the reasons also that I think they've really botched the Captain America Iron Man relationship. So, for example, in Civil War, they take precisely the wrong positions. Okay, Captain America is a patriotic guy, which would suggest that he would be kind of pro-Patriot Act, and then Iron Man is a libertarian, right? He's a guy who says, I'm not going to hand over my power to you, but suddenly he wants to hand over his identity to the federal government. None of that makes any sense.
Got it. Austin says, hey, Ben, what are your thoughts on the job fed Jay Powell, on the job federal chairman, I think that's what he means, Jay Powell is doing so far, and do you think Trump's protective trade policies are increasing the likelihood of a recession in 2019?
So I think the Fed policy so far has been fine. I haven't seen any real indicators that they're doing anything wrong. I like that I think raising interest rates is appropriate given the situation. As far as the president and his trade policy, I think the tariffs are very stupid policy unless they are directed toward trying to leverage human rights change, or unless they're a punishment for some sort of fraud. But the idea that we're going to unilaterally fix our trade deficits by starting a trade war with China is idiotic. First of all, trade deficits are not an indicator of economic health. There are plenty of countries that have huge trade surpluses and are garbage, and plenty of countries that have huge trade deficits and are great. This is because you have a trade deficit with every business you do business with. I mean, if you are a subscriber and asking a question, you have a trade deficit with Daily Wire. Does that mean that we screwed you? Well, I mean, maybe we did, but that's not. But the trade deficit is not actually the evidence of that, right? I mean, the fact is that you voluntarily gave up money, and we voluntarily gave up my time, even though I'm extraordinarily tired to talk to you and answer your questions. So that is an exchange of services or goods that is worthwhile and makes both of our lives better. You're getting a disproportionate benefit today. But if you were to say, okay, I'm going to boycott Daily Wire now because I have a trade deficit with Daily Wire, that'd be idiotic. Then you'd have to go get a Crowder mug or something. And who the hell wants a Crowder mug? Why would that be something that you'd want?
Joel says, this fall I'll be teaching ethics as an adjunct professor at a community college. What ideas and goals would you advise me to keep in mind as I teach the course?
So I'm a big fan of the idea that if you're going to teach ethics, you should start off with the basic idea of Greek teleology. In Greek teleology just means the idea that the universe is designed towards certain ends, right? Telos means goal in Greek, and so the idea would be that you are designed as a human being to reason, or that marriage is designed as an institution to create children. Thinking in these ways is natural to human beings, and I think it's also more correct when you disconnect the idea of a telos, a discoverable rationale in the universe through your use of reason for particular things and particular actions. You end up creating your own sort of castles of morality in your mind, and that's been, historically speaking, a disaster. You have to wed ethics to something deeper than whatever I think is beneficial today, whether it's utilitarianism or even Kantian ethics, which I like. I mean, I like Kantian ethics. I think Kant was attempting to restore some sort of credible grounding for biblical ethics without the Bible. The problem is that is likely to fail in the absence of any sort of objective, either natural law logic or an objective belief in revelation.
Thank you, Professor Shapiro.
Not a problem.
Moving on. Andrew says, what lightsaber color would you pick?
Ooh, I'd have to go green. I don't know. I'm an original guy, so I have to go with like Luke's original lightsaber.
Okie dokie. Megan says, Ben, what do you think of making
It wasn't blue. It's not blue.
Oh, we have an argument.
How dare you? It's like maybe you're watching the non-VHS version, my friend.
Moving on from that nerd battle that just happened in the studio, Megan says, Ben, what do you think of making Puerto Rico an official state? Since they pay federal taxes and have very limited voting power in the House, do you think that is taxation without representation?
There's a good case to be made that it's taxation without representation. The big problem, of course, is that Puerto Rico has been run into the ground. It's essentially bankrupt at this point. So if it were to become a state, then the federal government would probably have to assume an enormous amount of financial burden for Puerto Rico. If you want to iron out the financial problems and then talk about statehood for Puerto Rico, I'm totally for it.
Okay. Stephen asks a very compelling question. He wants to know if you miss debating politics with Brian Whitman.
No.
Eric says...
No. Ely was on that show too, by the way.
I remember.
Yeah. Good times.
For some.
Would you like to read another question, or should we just like gaze wistfully into the camera?
Eric says, hi, Ben. Who are some of your favorite Russian and American composers? Thanks. Love the show.
Roger Stone. My favorite Russian composers. Russian, Rimsky-Korsakov, underrated. So you'd recognize his music from, he did, now I'm so tired. I'm forgetting the name of the piece.
Do you want me to Google
Scheherazade.
Okay.
So Alexander Borodin, some of his stuff is beautiful. If you've ever seen the movie Kismet or heard the song Kismet, that is an Alexander Borodin theme. His music's really interesting. Tchaikovsky's music is really interesting. I do like some Shostakovich. Stravinsky is really interesting. Although, yeah, I think Stravinsky's Russian. I believe so. If I'm mistaken, then I will hear about it in the mail. As far as American composers, Gershwin is a deeply underrated composer. George Concerto in F is fantastic. That's the one that you haven't heard. Go watch the original American in Paris with a full rendition of the third movement of the Concerto in F. Is just terrific. Rhapsody in Blue, of course, is a great piece of work. Porgy and Bess is terrific. So Gershwin is up there. Samuel Barber, Adagio for Strings, you've heard if you watch Platoon, you've heard Adagio for Strings. Trying to think what other American composers I really like. The truth is most of the best classical music of the last 40 years is all film music. So John Williams has, of course, written a lot of terrific music. But before that, there's some ragtime that's pretty good. There's a lot of jazz that's pretty terrific. So I'm a big fan of American composers, actually. Although all of them are virtually more modern because there weren't a lot in the 19th century.
Joe says, is a 10% religious tithe supposed to be pre-tax or post-tax?
Big debate in the Jewish community over this, actually.
And by the way, for evangelicals as well.
Okay,
and
so
I know this is a question that Dave Ramsey gets a lot.
Yeah, so my feeling is post-tax. But that's because I'm selfish. So I don't have a great rationale for that other than the government is already taking an extraordinary portion of my money. And if I were to pay 10% upfront to charity and then the government were to take another 98% of my money,
you have nothing to live on?
I have nothing to live on. So, listen, we should all give more charity.
Do you have something, though, in the Torah to kind of back that up? Or is it just your...
the pre-tax versus post-tax
Yeah.
thing? It's a lively debate.
Mhm.
And it also depends. Like there are questions as to whether you can count like your children's Jewish school tuition in the charity, or whether that's something apart.
Interesting. Alrighty then. Because sending my kid to Catholic school, even though we ain't Catholic, I wonder if that...
Wow.
I'm gonna talk.
Well, how not Catholic are you? Like, do you feel like you're doing something deeply wrong by sending your kid to Catholic school?
No, but I figured it was easier to have a conversation with her why we don't, think that why we don't pray to saints and all that stuff, and explain to her who the Pope is from our perspective, than explain LGBTQ week to her.
I mean, that's fair, but she's gonna be real popular at school. So that's it.
I'm like, they love Jesus, we love Jesus. The rest will work itself out. Aaron says, hey, Ben, my wife is also a hot doctor.
Congratulations, dude. Well done.
My question is, what types of things do you do to help out at home or help her to relax after a hard day?
I do all the things.
That is so sweet.
I do all the things. Okay, the answer is all of them. So it's it's not true. My wife does a lot of stuff, but my wife is home usually later than I am. That means that I take the kids. It means that I usually go pick up dinner. Now, every so often, my wife has time to cook dinner, and it is the greatest thing. It is wonderful. I love when my wife cooks dinner. But I would say that typically speaking, we're either ordering out or we have a nanny who helps out, and she cooks the dinner. I run a lot of the errands. I try to, we split a lot of the kind of buying stuff. Thank God for Amazon, which makes it a world of easiness to actually get things done. But I'm pretty helpful around the house. I would say, I think that's a fair statement. If my wife's listening to this, then I think that she would back that up. I think she should back that up. And if not, then we'll pretend that she never heard this.
I'm going to text her after this.
We should do a full episode. I think at one point we'll do a full episode.
You know that
of like the Sunday special with my wife.
That has to happen.
It would be pretty great.
And actually, I almost want her to interview you, like a reverse.
Well, I think it'll be. I mean, she'll rip on me. She'll like.
Yeah.
I'll have to, but she's so sweet. I'd actually have to sort of almost give her permission to rip on me. So I would freely do that because it's hilarious when she does.
It would be amazing. Alex says, given you side with the Austrian school on most economic issues, I'm curious why you are so quick to claim that there is a quote unquote booming economy under Trump.
The economy is good right now and Trump's the president. That doesn't mean that President Trump is what caused the economy to boom. I'm not a big fan of the idea that any president is really responsible for the economic boom or failure unless you can actually draw a direct path between a particular policy and the economic boom. The reality is that the vast majority of economic circumstances have nothing to do with government at all, and it's not Trump that is creating jobs. Now, that said, I like a lot of his policies. I think deregulation is good for business. I think the tax cuts are good for business. But in the absence of President Trump, if the economy were bad right now, would that be solely President Trump's fault? No. I mean, I think this is why I don't buy the whole statistic people trot out where they go, well, Democrats have created more jobs than Republicans under their presidency. It's like, so what? That's a stupid statistic. That's like saying that's basically attributing everything to, like, when you start that clock. Do you start the clock with when Obama became president, or do you start that clock 3 months after Obama became president because there's not much he could do in his first 3 months? Do you start the clock with President Trump the day he became president? Do you start maybe before he became president because the race was having an impact on the markets? The fact is the markets are an enormous agglomeration of collective knowledge, and trying to peg that down to anything Trump does, I know we're simple-minded, and we think the president is the only thing that matters. He ain't the king, and trying to pretend he is stupid.
Alrighty, moving on. Forrest says, can you tell us a funny story about one of your kids? Perhaps your favorite story or just one that stands out? And what is it like to have hybrids of you and a more capable doctor?
So my kids have funny stories like legitimately every day. Every day. So let's see, 2 days ago, my daughter was talking to my wife, and she is whip smart and mean as hell. And she
like
is,
you.
I love her so much.
Apple doesn't
She's
fall
the
far
best.
from the tree.
She's the best. She's actually a sweetie, but she does have like she's very cunning, and she is
for a
talking
4-year-old
to
especially.
Oh my goodness, oh man, and she turns to my wife and she said, and I'm standing right there, and she goes, I think Daddy should get a job, and my wife says, what? And my wife says, what do you think Daddy has a job? Well, what kind of job should Daddy get? And she says, I think he should fart. I said, well, kid. Can't argue with that.
If we could all get paid for our natural bodily functions.
Well, we can't all be Stormy Daniels. In any case.
Oh, no. Oh, Lord have mercy. You should bring her into the office sometime, though.
Stormy Daniels or my daughter?
No, your daughter. Oh, God. Don't bring Stormy in here, please.
My daughter is Yeah, she's smart, and my boy is just a
But then
nut.
she
I
could
mean,
see what they could see what
Oh
Daddy
no,
does.
she knows what Daddy does.
Okay.
The other day she said, "I want to be a doctor like Mommy," and Gabriel can be a doctor. Gabriel can be a radio host like Daddy.
Oh, that's precious.
That's my 2-year-old son.
We should just have a kid stay at the office though, because it's more fun when they're here.
For sure. They're a blast. My son is a nutcase. My son is just...
He'd destroy the studio.
Oh, my goodness. He would break everything and run into things, and he's a wild man.
Oh, yeah.
Kids are suicide machines. I mean, when they're below the age of 5, they just try to kill themselves all the time. Particularly boys, they're just trying to murder themselves. And you spend all day just grabbing kids off of falling chairs.
And then they think it's funny, too.
Oh, yeah, then he starts
they're
laughing.
This close to cracking their head open, you grab them, they're like, ha, 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 let's do that again.
That's exactly right.
I've seen you chase him around, and
Yep.
that's pretty much all you do. Wyatt says, I have Asperger's, and I was wondering if you think that people like myself need to be challenged more rather than just be coddled for our disabilities.
Well, I mean, I don't know you personally. What I would say is that people have to be challenged up to the standard they can take. And I think that most people, when challenged, have the capacity to rise to a particular level. I think that as a society, this is true for people who don't have conditions as well as people who do have conditions. More challenges tend to be better. And that's not just in terms of what's better for you, it's also what tends to make people happier. So there is I always mispronounce this psychologist's name. It's Mikhail Csikszentmihalyi or something. He's the author of a concept called flow. The concept of flow is that you are happiest in your life when you are challenged by something and then you are attempting to leverage your skill set to pursue that challenge successfully. And so when you're engrossed in doing work that you know you can do, but it's a little hard, then this is when you are most happy in life. And I think that's true for everybody, which means that you should seek challenges, not challenges that make your life harder, but challenges, goals to aspire to. And if you do that, then I think that it gives you something to aim for, and that's something worthwhile.
All right, Jeremy has an interesting question. He says, how do you respond to people who compare the Jews fleeing Egypt during Passover to the immigration crisis unfolding on our southern border?
Well, I mean, the fact is that the Jews were fleeing into a desert. I mean, they weren't fleeing into a sovereign nation. And if they were fleeing into a sovereign nation, that doesn't happen until the book of Joshua. So when you're talking about the idea that there's a group of people who are attempting to escape their homeland, I have a lot of sympathy for those folks. I really do. I mean, if I were living in El Salvador, I probably would be attempting to get out as well, and so would you, because El Salvador is not the greatest place to live. But with all that said, it's the obligation of any country to uphold its border. One of the big problems is that you really only should restrict immigration in the best of all available circumstances. You'd only restrict immigration based on crime and based on cultural lack of assimilation, right? Those would be the only two things. And the problem is we've now added a third factor, which is the economic factor, because we have this whole vast welfare system in which people can have benefits. Otherwise, I'd be fully libertarian on a lot of these issues, because if you want to come here and engross yourself in the American lifestyle and be part of the capitalistic competition, more power to you. Again, I have nothing but sympathy for people who are trying to get out of crappy countries to get to better ones for the sake of their family. That doesn't mean, however, the United States doesn't have an obligation to protect its own citizens and vet the people who are coming in.
Alrighty, Evan says, Ben, would you be upset with your wife if she didn't want to be a doctor anymore?
At this point, I would be so happy if she were not in residency. I cannot even tell you. I mean, I love my wife. I am very happy that she's doing something that is worthwhile and that she's helping make people's lives better and save their lives. But I love my wife, and I don't get to see her all that much. And so her being home
you
more
throw
than
out all that debt, too, that you've already paid?
Oh, yeah. That would be, there's that as well. I mean, listen, my wife always knows. One of the things that has made our marriage successful is that when it looked like she was going to get into medical school on the East Coast, I was ready to change my life plans and move with her to the East Coast. When it looked like I had plans that would take me to the East Coast, she was ready to transfer from college on the West Coast to the East Coast. If you know you're rooting for each other's dreams, then you're likely to have a good marriage.
Good observation and good advice. Joe asks an interesting question. How is masturbation any different from abortion? My understanding is that from a religious perspective, both are prohibited.
So okay, so I will give you the secular answer, and then I will give you the religious answer.
Okay.
So the secular answer is that when you masturbate, you're not killing a baby. So there's that. In order for you to kill a baby, the baby has to exist. The baby only starts to exist at conception, because otherwise you're talking about one part of a genetic component, but not the full genetic component. And sperm by itself does not grow into a baby. A fertilized egg by itself will grow into a baby. So that's a different thing. And the logical attempts to link the two are asinine to me. It makes no sense. As far as the religious taboo with regard to masturbation, that is largely going back to the book of Genesis and the story of Tamar and her husband. Her husband dies, and then her husband's brother marries her, and then he commits, his name is Onan, right? And then he commits onanism, which is that he refuses to impregnate her. Now, there's actually an interesting sort of debate over what onanism constitutes. Is it just masturbation, or is onanism the idea that you are humiliating this woman by not procreating with her? It's an interesting debate, but that's where the religious taboo on masturbation comes from. That's all I have to say about that. I mean, I don't really have a lot more than that.
All right, Jeremy says, how can we solve for the fact that ICE is too overwhelmed to efficiently process immigrants attempting to cross the border legally?
Obviously, we have to increase the size and scope of ICE, and the fact that we have not done that, I think, is a bit of a travesty. The government has very few legitimate functions, and it seems to me that immigration and customs enforcement is one of them.
All right. Michael says, hey, Ben, I want to go to law school after I graduate college. Since you went to Harvard Law, what was your LSAT score and how did you study for it?
I don't know if I should say my LSAT score out loud. My wife's always saying, don't say your LSAT score out loud.
Why?
Because it sounds arrogant.
But you should say it. You were just asked. It's not like you're like, hey, this is my LSAT score.
Okay,
you're not like running around shouting it.
So I got a 176 on my LSAT. I think that, what was the end of that question?
Like, how did you study for it? So how should you study for it?
I recommend to everybody. There are test prep programs that are quite good. Test Masters is one that I really favor. I think it's quite good. They will help you learn. There's a certain system of sort of symbolic logic that they use on the LSATs, and if you learn how to do it, then it makes time saving a lot easier. So I would recommend Test Masters. I've recommended it openly to everybody. I think it's quite good.
All right. I am hoping I'm saying this name right. Is it Doty? So Doty says, if Comey didn't have the legal authority at the FBI that allowed Hillary to walk without any consequences, can they reinvestigate her now along with anyone else involved?
Well, she was never tried and acquitted, right? I mean, they just didn't prosecute her. So they could theoretically reopen the investigation and then prosecute her. I think that is highly doubtful at that point. Also, I'm not sure the precedent is great that we're going to just start prosecuting old political opponents, even if it may be legit, just because it creates this feeling that, okay, now Trump is going to be out of office at some point. Now we get to prosecute Trump or everybody in his administration. If this turns into a running gun battle of FBI's investigating prior administrations, it's going to get very ugly very quickly, even more so than it is now.
Jeremy asks, hey, Ben, how do you feel about ranked choice voting?
So ranked choice voting, for those who don't understand it, is basically this idea that when you go into the ballot box, then instead of you just voting for, say, Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, instead what you do is you vote for, in order, you say, I want Donald Trump, and then I want Gary Johnson, and then I want Jill Stein, and then I want this pile of dung, and then I want Hillary Clinton, right? You actually just rank your vote, your vote choice. It doesn't really hold in presidential elections quite as much, but in district elections where you have multiple candidates and nobody's getting to 50%, what you can do is it knocks off the bottom choice. So let's say that you voted for pile of dung as number one, but it was the number 5 vote getter. So that gets knocked off, and then your number 2 choice counts. As opposed to right now, if you vote for the wrong person in the primary, your vote doesn't count at all, right? If you vote for the person who finished 3rd in a runoff, then that vote didn't count. But if you vote for that person who finished 3rd, and then your secondary vote was for somebody who finished 1st or 2nd, then that counts as sort of part of a vote for those people. I think there's a strong case to be made for ranked choice voting. It would actually have a pretty significant impact on the 2-party system because it would lead to the increase in third parties. I think there's a strong case to be made for ranked choice voting, although I don't think people would understand what's going on.
They already don't. The options that they currently have. Joshua says, Ben, do you think it would be helpful for someone to write a current English version of the Constitution? I just read it for the first time and had to reread much of it in order to understand it.
I mean, I think that
there's different versions of the Bible.
I think that what you should really do, given how much the Constitution has been reinterpreted over time, unfortunately, I think the best thing to do is go out and get, for example, the Heritage Constitution, Guide to the Constitution. That's a 300-page book on a 5,000-word document. But it's about a 300-page book kind of going clause by clause and explaining what each clause means. But sure, I mean, I think the idea of boiling down the Constitution into some sort of more understandable text for people who are not familiar with the writings of the founders and the style of the time, that'd probably be a useful thing, sure.
Maybe you should do that.
Oh, we can do that.
Just throwing that out there.
Sure.
Blake has a pretty juicy scenario to ask you about. He says, Ben, my girlfriend and I just got into a huge argument that was sparked by Amy Schumer.
She's the worst.
Oh, I think Blake agrees with you here. But his girlfriend feels that she stands for building self-confidence in women.
Oh,
and I think she is
poor decisions in life, my friend.
And Blake says that he thinks that Amy Schumer is human debris. Should I pick this battle?
I mean, it depends. Do you want to stay with this girlfriend or not? Would you rather be... Okay, quick relationship advice. First question to ask yourself all the time, if you're in a relationship, would you rather be right or would you rather be happy? Okay, because the reality is that you are often right and you are often unhappy. Yes, Amy Schumer's the worst. Is it worth breaking up with this girl over Amy Schumer? Maybe. Amy Schumer's pretty terrible. But that's your choice. I'm not going to tell you ought to break up with this girl over Amy Schumer because that seems, not supremely important. But if it's an indicator of how she thinks about life, that she thinks Amy Schumer is a force for empowerment, I'll tell you what, I think that goes to deep spiritual values. I would not be dating a girl who's into Amy Schumer.
Your answer to that question just shows the difference of the wide-ranging talent thoughts we have here. Because were Michael Knowles in your seat, he would say, "How hot is she?"
Of course he would. Because he's the worst.
Ben asks, will you right now denounce the new Star Wars? No soft pedaling, no political spin. Denounce it.
Which movie? So I will denounce Force Awakens. Yes, it is the worst. Okay. And then I will denounce Last Jedi. Also the worst. I'm going to say something popular, just like all my other opinions. It is slightly less bad than Force Awakens. Why? Not because it's a less bad movie. It is not a less bad movie. It is a worse movie. But because it is attempting to fix the mistakes of The Force Awakens and failing. Okay, whatever his face is, Ryan Johnson, who's directing that thing, he had all of this crap that he had to deal with in Force Awakens, and he proceeded to botch all of it. But he was handed basically a bag of turd that was flaming and told to put it out with his foot. So that was basically what happened in that movie. As far as Rogue One, I like Rogue One. As far as Solo, I'm fine with Solo. I don't have huge problems with either of those films. In fact, I kind of enjoyed Solo. My only problem was they'd already killed off Han Solo in Force Awakens in the stupidest possible way. So now you gave me a prequel about a guy who I know is going to die in the future by being killed by his son after hanging out in the galaxy with his Wookiee friend as a loser hanging around in like a VW bug with golden dice on the dashboard.
This is why I say that Angry Ben is my favorite Ben.
So tired.
We only have 5 minutes left, so if you're a subscriber, get over to dailywire.com right now and send in your questions. 5-minute countdown. You ready to roll?
Let's do it.
Jason says, I got interested in conservatism after reading Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged. What about you, Ben? If you can identify one author who sparked your interest in conservatism, who would it be?
So I would say I was interested in conservatism from the time I was young and watching 1776. So I was always interested in American history. And if you're interested in founding history, you end up sort of moving toward conservatism. Ayn Rand is an interesting kind of writer, just by way of quick note, because I want to get to more of these questions. Ayn Rand's take on the driving force behind economics, which is individual creativity, I think is exactly right. Her belief in the selfishness of human relationships, I think, is almost diametrically wrong. So I'm very much a fan of Ayn Rand's when it comes to her economic philosophy and the value of capitalism. I'm very much not a fan of hers when it comes to her philosophy of personal relationships.
All right, Wyatt says, I graduated with a degree in film and photography. Do you think liberal arts programs are a joke? I'm currently planning to move to Texas to pursue business ideas.
Well, I mean, I don't think all liberal arts are a joke. I mean, it depends on where you go to college and what you're studying. And it depends. I mean, did you just watch a bunch of movies and then deconstruct them for their feminist messaging? If so, then yes, you wasted your time. If it turns out that you learned how to work a camera, then good for you, right? I mean, that's an actual marketable skill. So I wouldn't lump all liberal arts together. But if you're asking me what do I think is more useful, STEM subjects or liberal arts, no question STEM subjects.
All right. Justin says, do you believe the 1960s are the worst decade in American history? And if not, which one?
Well, the 1960s are definitely up there. You'd have to go 1850s, right? I mean, when slavery was still around, that kind of blew, right? That was pretty terrible. You would have to go probably 1910s were not a good decade. The advent of World War I, the rise of progressive government in the United States, the Great Depression was a horrible decade, and the 1930s were a really bad decade. Lots of bad decades in American history. What's amazing is that we actually haven't had a pretty terrible decade in a long time, right?
That's
it's really been since the 1970s. The 1970s were a bad decade, but since then, we've had a pretty good run, America, as far as economics anyway. As far as culture, not quite as good a run.
And you could argue that in the 2000s, you also had the threat of terror.
Right, and then you had the economic downturn, but I don't think we lived through the 2000s, and I mean that's nothing like the 1960s, 70s, or 30s. So
okay, Brenton says, "Hey Ben, if you, Clavin, and Knowles were watching the World Cup, who would fall asleep first?"
I mean, right now, me. I mean, right now, you could put on the most exciting movie in the world, and I'd fall asleep. I mean, I'm barely staying awake to answer these questions. So, but you know, I think that Knowles is a glad-hander, so it depends who else is in the room. Like, if a bunch of people love the World Cup in the room, then suddenly Knowles would be the biggest World Cup fan. So right now, he's ripping on the World Cup and saying, "Oh, the World Cup's the worst. It's so terrible. MAGA." Right? Okay, yeah, if you put him in the room with a bunch of foreigners, he'd be like, yeah, I love the World Cup. Look at me wear this pretentious necktie that has a soccer ball on it. That would be Knowles. And then if there's Clavin probably doesn't like it just because he's from Brooklyn or he's from New York. And so he has a tendency to hate soccer. But there's also real British sides of Clavin. Like on the back of one of his books, he has this whole thing about how he summers in Connecticut. And I mocked him mercilessly for that. Anybody who says they summered in Connecticut on the back of one of their books at some point has watched soccer for enjoyment.
Tell us how you really feel. Final countdown. Sean has asked, has the effort for progressive gun policy slowed, i.e. suppressors and the American Hearing Act, Share Act?
Yeah, I mean, no question that the push for gun control has slowed because in broad strokes, Americans are quote-unquote pro-gun control, but when it comes down to specifics, then we're not. In the same way that we are pro-cutting government, except when it comes down to what programs do you want to cut, in which case we're like, nah, let's not do that. So it's the same way about gun control.
It's the final question here, and it comes from Rachel, and it just went away. But I think there it is. In primetime propaganda, you mentioned how much Nixon hated the media and went after them quite a lot. Do you see any comparisons or contrasts with how Trump deals with them?
Nixon despised the media. Trump despised the media. The difference is that Richard Nixon was secretive and clever, and President Trump is a blunderbuss. I mean, President Trump obviously does not make his hatred for the media any sort of mystery, and he's not trying to play them. He's basically straight out saying what everybody was feeling, including Nixon. So that's not a great surprise, and every so often it is quite pleasant to watch him take somebody in the media apart. My big problem with President Trump on the media is I would like him to be a little more tactical in how he attacks the media. Wait until they tell a lie and then hit them. Don't hit them just because they happen to be sitting there and Jim Acosta's hair is stupid.
Thanks for being here.
Well,
you made it.
I did.
It's been one whole hour.
I'm going home and I'm going to sleep.
Go take a nap now. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Subscribe to dailywire.com now and join us for next month's conversation with Andrew Klavan. And that is going to be on Tuesday, July 17th at 5:30 p.m. Eastern, 2:30 p.m. Pacific. I'm Elisha Krause, and I will see you next time.